On a fragile hospital unit suspended somewhere between life and death, the Neonatal Intensive Care Unit, or NICU, is a place that desperate parents cling to hope that their babies will survive and someday go home. But what happens when a demented nurse infiltrates that delicate system and acts as an angel of death instead of help? Today, we're going to be discussing the horrifying story of registered nurse turned serial killer Lucy Letby. This deplorable woman was charged with murdering 7 neonatal babies and attempting to take the lives of 8 more. Get ready, you guys, because this story is truly heartbreaking. The Countess of Chester Hospital's neonatal unit cared for premature and vulnerable newborn babies, but it did not usually see a high number of infant deaths. In fact, most NICUs don't because they intervene and they have all the right tools to be able to try to save their lives. The goal, like all areas of the hospital, is to get everyone stable and send them home. The teams in critical care, though, are highly certified, and they, like I said before, will do everything possible to save an infant's life, with the exception of Lucy Letby. In 2015, that positive reputation that the hospital had dramatically changed. Between June of 2015 and the end of that year, a bunch of unusual circumstances, codes, emergencies, and deaths were happening on the unit, and all happened while Lucy was on duty. These incidents were initially attributed to medical complications or the fragile health of these infants, but they formed a chilling pattern. Now we're sadly going to talk about the precious babies' lives that were heinously stolen, and we will be referring to them by letters because their identities were protected in the media. But before we get too far in, hi everybody, welcome to the True Crime Nurse. My name is Kat, and I'm a registered nurse that loves all things nursing and true crime. Please be sure to like, subscribe, and comment down below any cases that you want me to check out. The first known victim was a baby boy referred to in court as Child A, born prematurely at about 31 weeks gestation. He and his twin sister, Child B, had been in the neonatal unit for less than a day. On the night of June 8, 2015, Lucy came onto shift and was assigned to care for Child A. Within 90 minutes of her arrival, baby A suddenly deteriorated and died unexpectedly. Doctors were alarmed. This code was abrupt and severe with no obvious medical explanation. Codes in the hospital are called for critical situations that require life-saving measures like CPR, typically when someone stops breathing or their heart stops beating. Another phrase that you're going to hear me use today, probably a lot, is the term crashing. And that's sort of a nursing slang term that just means that this patient's unstable and they may end up coding. Okay, back to our story. According to evidence later presented, a large amount of air had been injected into baby A's bloodstream, causing an air embolism that led to his rapid decline and code. At the time, this wasn't known for certain. The infant's death was a shock, but sadly, premature babies can and do sometimes die of complications. This immediately made me sick to my stomach because Lucy's first alleged kill was in using something that she thought couldn't be traced back to her, like a medication. She used air. An air embolus is dangerous because it disrupts blood flow in the heart and it actually prevents you from getting oxygen. After she did this, Lucy Letby joined colleagues in grieving baby A's passing. She even later told a coworker that taking baby A to the mortuary was, quote, the hardest thing she ever had to do. No one suspected foul play that night. Just a day after baby A's death, his twin sister, Child B, became the center of another emergency. In the early hours of June 9, 2015, baby B suddenly coded, struggling to breathe as her oxygen levels plummeted to a critical level. Medical staff rushed to resuscitate her and managed to save her life, thankfully. What are the odds that this would be happening a second time? Baby B's code had a troubling resemblance to her brother's. It was sudden and unexplained. She survived, making this an attempted murder. Investigators would determine that Letby injected air into baby B's circulation as well, but thanks to prompt intervention, the twin girl was revived. At the time, the neonatal team treated baby B's near-death experience as a medical mystery, not realizing that it may have been deliberate. Letby was present during the crisis, and later on, evidence showed that she had also been texting colleagues about these events that were happening, almost as if she were narrating the drama in real time. These first two incidents, the death of one premature twin and the code of the other, began what would be later recognized as a deadly pattern. To know that she felt disappointment in not stealing baby B's life too, it honestly could make me vomit. Less than a week later, on June 14th, 2015, a third incident occurred. Child C was a tiny, premature baby boy born about 8 weeks early and only weighed 1.8 pounds or about 800 grams. He was not assigned to Lucy's direct care that night, but she was reportedly seen hovering around him. Baby C suddenly coded and stopped breathing in the late evening hours. Despite resuscitation attempts, he passed away. The cause was again confusing. There were no obvious internal issues except that his stomach was unusually bloated with air. It later emerged that air had been injected into his nasogastric or NG tube that goes through the nose into the stomach. A fellow nurse recalled seeing Letby standing by Baby C's monitor and watched as the alarm sounded, and thank God she did. Otherwise, this loss could have gone unnoticed. She really thought that she was sly in choosing someone else's patient to attack, thinking it wouldn't be connected to her. Again, in June 2015, no one accused Letby of any wrongdoing, but her colleagues were beginning to catch on. 3 serious events, 2 deaths and 1 near-death experience in the span of a week was far outside of the norm for this unit. The next case deepened that alarm among the doctors and coworkers at the Countess of Chester Hospital. Child D was a baby girl born full term, unlike the others who were all premature. She had been doing well after birth and only went to the NICU for a short period of time for some monitoring. On June 22nd, only about 36 hours into her life, she declined and died unexpectedly. This all happened within a month. Child D's autopsy and test couldn't find a clear cause of death, but prosecutors later showed that air had been injected into her bloodstream, and like the others, what killed her was an air embolism. With Baby D's death, consultants at the hospital became seriously concerned that something was very wrong. Dr. Stephen Brary, the lead neonatologist at the hospital, conducted an informal review of those recent cases because he felt something was off. When he looked for common factors in each of these codes, he noted an association with nurse Lucy Letby, specifically that Letby had been on duty and present at all of the codes. This was a really disturbing realization. Towards the end of June, after Baby D's death, Dr. Brary met with the hospital's director of nursing, Allison Kelly, and other administrators to discuss the cluster of fatalities. 4 infants, A, C, D, and the other twin, had now suffered serious unexplained events, 3 of them being fatal, in just a few weeks. Dr. Brary's preliminary review stressed that Lucy Letby was the only staff member present at every code. This was highly unusual and a highly unlikely coincidence, and he felt that it warranted further investigation or at least removing Letby from the unit while they figured out what was going on. However, at this stage of the investigation, it was handled cautiously and internally. The June meeting resulted in an informal review of Child D's death and recent events. It's not clear that hospital executives were ready to accept the implication that a staff member could be harming patients intentionally. Lucy Letby continued working her shifts, though, throughout the summer. Knowing that she continued working makes me so angry because all the signs were there and Dr. Brary presented enough evidence to have administration act on it. I will never understand, like many of the cases we've talked about and covered, why when information is reported, it's not acted on quickly or at all. Other families were forever changed at the hands of the hospital not intervening sooner. Meanwhile, Letby maintained the character of the compassionate, dedicated nurse. She even exchanged texts with colleagues and supervisors expressing concern and a desire to help more at work. For instance, just 3 days after baby A's death, Lucy messaged the unit manager, volunteering to take on extra shifts, saying that from, quote, a confidence point of view, I need to take a critical care baby soon, end quote, as if to prove that this tragedy hadn't shaken her up whatsoever. When a colleague texted her after yet another baby's death in June, Lucy replied that she would, quote, keep plowing on, and said that perhaps there's a reason for everything, almost saying that these outcomes were fate. These texts, later recovered by investigators, gave a disturbing glimpse into Lucy's mindset during these times. On the surface, she appeared upset and dedicated to work, but privately, she seemed oddly eager to remain at the center of all the action to continue murdering innocent babies. After a relatively quiet July, the crisis resumed in August. I personally feel like she started to pick up on the tension and the speculation at work, so she probably refrained from trying anything, but let me know if you guys agree down in the comments. Child E was a baby boy that was born prematurely as a set of twins. On August 4th, 2015, baby E was in Lucy's care when he suddenly severely deteriorated during that night shift. His mother was present in the hospital that night, hoping to try to breastfeed him for the first time. According to her testimony, the mother recalled hearing her baby scream in an unusual, distressing way and ran to the neonatal room with her mother's instinct surging. There, she found her infant bleeding from the mouth while nurse Lucy Letby was standing by his incubator doing nothing. Startled, the mother asked, "What is happening?" And Letby calmly explained that the NG feeding tube might have caused the bleeding, telling the mother, quote, "Trust me, I'm a nurse." Tragically, baby E continued to deteriorate and died a few hours later despite desperate attempts to save his life. Later, investigation revealed that baby E had suffered a significant internal bleed and air embolism. Letby had in fact inflicted an injury, likely an injection of air or some type of trauma that led to baby E's bleeding in the mouth and code. At that time, baby E's death was recorded as yet another mysterious event. Lucy appeared as if she were grieving, even writing a sympathy card to baby E's parents when the child's funeral was held. It actually later came out that she took a photo of this condolence card before sending it, an eerie detail discovered on her phone. Was this her version of a serial killer trophy? Within 24 hours, tragedy nearly struck again in the same family. Baby E's twin brother, child F, had been stable in the neonatal unit. On August 5th, the next day, the baby suffered a dangerous drop in blood sugar levels, also known as hypoglycemia, while under Lucy's care. Nurses on the unit found that his glucose readings were plummeting to life-threatening lows. Baby F fortunately survived the episode after receiving urgent treatment, but the cause was mysterious. Such a severe hypoglycemic attack is very unusual in a neonate without any underlying conditions. Because baby F lived, clinicians were able to send a blood sample for analysis. The test that was done at an outside lab would later come back with a stunning finding. Baby F had an extremely high level of insulin in his blood, far above what a newborn would ever produce naturally. In fact, it appeared that insulin had been intentionally administered, causing his blood sugar to crash. This lab result, however, did not return immediately. At that time in August, doctors simply noted baby F's hypoglycemia and recovery. In hindsight, child F was a victim of attempted murder by insulin poisoning, making him one of two babies, along with baby L, months later, that Lucy Letby injected with insulin because the hospital was catching on to her prior technique using air. By the end of the first week of August, the neonatal unit at the Countess of Chester Hospital had seen 4 suspicious deaths, babies A, C, D, and E, and 3 near-fatal codes for the others. This all happened in the span of just 2 months. Internally, some auditors were now really worried that these events might not be a coincidence. Ding, ding, ding. Dr. Breary and others again raised concerns to hospital management, but they remained private. I understand that internal audits need to be kept private, but I feel that there needs to be a different approach when we're talking about repeated, unexplained deaths, especially in babies. The assumption within the hospital was that there still must be some kind of explanation, maybe an unknown infection, a problem with equipment, or sheer bad luck hitting an overstretched unit. The idea that a nurse, especially one as kind and seemingly dedicated as Lucy Letby, could be deliberately harming infants was so unthinkable that it wasn't immediately accepted by administrators. Actually, managers would later be criticized for failing to act quickly on the doctor's warnings, and I think that they deserve far more than criticism for allowing this to continue on. The next acute event that happened involved child G, who was one of the most premature babies in the unit on that day. Baby G was born extremely early, at just 23 to 24 weeks gestation, barely on the edge of viability. In early September, baby G was 2 months old and was actually doing better than expected given her prematurity. For those of you that don't know, viability means that that's when the baby can survive outside of the womb. Despite beating the odds, on September 7th, 2015, which happened to be the baby's 100th day of life, a milestone her family celebrated with a little cake on the unit for, tragedy struck. In the early morning hours, baby G suddenly violently vomited and stopped breathing while Lucy was taking care of her. The baby's heart rate and oxygen levels collapsed. Staff fought so incredibly hard to save her life, and she was resuscitated, but the incident left baby G in a severely compromised state. She suffered permanent brain damage from the lack of oxygen to her brain. It was later determined that Letby had force-fed baby G an excessive amount of milk or fluid through her feeding tube, far beyond what her tiny stomach could handle, leading to that projectile vomiting and aspiration, meaning that the baby choked on their own vomit. This was another case of attempted murder. Baby G did survive, but with lifelong disabilities. At trial, baby G's family described that she was left blind, quadriplegic, and in need of constant care for the rest of her life. On that night in 2015, however, the event was documented as a serious medical incident, stacking on to all the other suspicious events at the hospital. Because baby G lived, she wasn't counted as a death, but internal audits and investigators noted how extraordinarily close she came to dying. It was highly unusual for a baby who had been stable for weeks to just suddenly decompensate the way that she did. To everyone's horror, baby G was attacked again about 2 weeks later. On September 21st, while still in the neonatal unit recovering from the prior event, baby G had another sudden code, again associated with feeding. Prosecutors later charged Letby with attempting to murder baby G a second time on this date because she was yet again caring for her. They alleged that Lucy Letby introduced air into baby G's NG tube during a feed, which caused baby G to stop breathing. This time, she learned from the last, and instead of using milk, she reverted back to air, which is just as evil and sociopathic as it gets. I'm sure to Lucy's disappointment, the infant was saved by resuscitation or CPR a second time. In total, Lucy Letby faced 3 separate charges for attacking baby G, 2 on September 21st and 1 on September 7th, though the jury would only convict her of 2 and acquit her of 1. Baby G was moved out of the Countess of Chester to another hospital for specialized care, which likely protected her from further harm. And I wonder if this was the hospital being strategic to get her away from Lucy, or if it was truly required that she needed a higher level of care. The evidence of baby G's overfeeding and the pattern of her 2 critical events added to the growing suspicion around Letby as the common denominator. Toward the end of September, yet another infant experienced unexplained emergencies on Letby's watch. Child H was a baby girl born about 6 weeks premature. In late September 2015, baby H had 2 life-threatening codes on consecutive nights, September 26th and September 27th, while Lucy Letby was on duty. During one of these episodes, baby H suffered a collapsed lung or pneumothorax and had to be intubated and ventilated. Each time, doctors intervened and managed to stabilize her, but finally, after the second code, baby H was transferred to a different hospital. Oddly enough, once moved away from Chester, baby H recovered, quote, in leaps and bounds, as a doctor later testified. She survived without the mysterious problems recurring. Lucy Letby was later accused of attempting to murder baby H twice during those 24 hours. The prosecution suspected that she had tampered with baby H's lines or equipment, possibly interfering with the chest tube or drain, or also had tried to dislodge a breathing tube to cause her to stop breathing. However, at trial, Letby was not convicted in baby H's case. The jury cleared her of 1 charge and could not reach a verdict on the other. More to come on that later, though. Regardless of the trial outcome, baby H's frightening codes at the time added to the patterns of incidents that all clustered around Lucy. With each additional incident, I ask myself, why isn't the hospital intervening? How is the evidence of 2 babies improving after getting the heck away from Lucy not overwhelming enough? I will never understand why it continued. Heartbreakingly, we have to continue on, though, to additional victims. One of the most heartbreaking cases was baby I, a premature baby girl that was born around 27 weeks gestation. Baby I had been in the neonatal unit for several weeks and overcame every hurdle thrown her way, growing stronger over time. She was a fighter, and this courage was clear to her doctors because she was considered close to discharge finally by the end of 2015. But between September and October, baby I had multiple unexplained episodes of critical events. In the early hours of October 23, 2015, after several near misses, baby I died while under Lucy Letby's care. This was the 4th baby that had passed away, now linked to Lucy that same year. The prosecution would later claim that Letby attacked baby I on at least 3 separate occasions before succeeding in her killing. The specific mechanism was believed to be similar to others. She injected air either into baby I's feeding tube or bloodstream, causing a fatal air embolism. Medical staff were horrified and emotionally drained. Baby I's death especially hit them hard because they had all grown attached to her during her long fight for survival there. A nurse, not Letby, sent an email to the hospital managers expressing concern after baby I's death because baby I crashing this way didn't make any sense. In this email, the nurse was indicating that some on the unit were truly alarmed that something was very wrong. Baby I's case was described in court as involving repeated cruelty, as the infant was attacked again and again until she finally succumbed to her injuries. Despite these horrendous acts, the trauma continued. An incident in late November involving child J, a baby girl who had undergone surgery on her abdomen, was recovering really well. On November 27, 2015, baby J had a sudden code during a night shift when Letby was on duty. She experienced seizures and required emergency intervention, but thankfully she survived. Prosecutors later alleged that Letby attempted to murder baby J that night by tampering with her breathing tube or otherwise destabilizing her because no natural cause was found for the acute distress in this baby. Baby J was a twin. Her brother actually died of natural causes completely unrelated to Letby, which initially drew less suspicion to J's event, but later that changed. During the trial, jurors could not reach a verdict on the charge regarding baby J, so it remains as an allegation. However, in terms of timeline, the event further reinforced that whenever Letby was around, babies who had been improving for no known reasons declined. By the end of 2015, the neonatal unit had seen an unprecedented amount of tragedies. In total, from June to October, 5 babies had died under mysterious circumstances, babies A, C, D, E, and I, and that amount, if not more, had survived sudden codes with serious medical interventions, babies B, F, G, H, and J. The neonatal mortality rate for 2015 had more than doubled compared to prior years. These numbers stressed that something strange and alarming was happening, and the amount of evidence was irrefutable. Throughout this period, Lucy Letby continued working shifts as a trusted nurse. None of the hospital leaders or staff had ever dealt with the possibility of a caregiver serial killing and harming babies. Some doctors were suspicious of Lucy Letby by 2015, especially Dr. Brary and pediatrician Dr. Ravi. They had privately begun referring to a potential malevolent actor on the unit, even if they didn't initially name Lucy Letby publicly. But when they pushed their concerns upward, they encountered resistance. Why? Despite the horrors of 2015, Lucy Letby continued to work into 2016, and sadly, more incidents unfolded before any decisive action was taken prior to her arrest. Early 2016 saw further near-fatal emergencies on the unit. In February, the hospital invited an independent neonatologist from Liverpool Women's Hospital to conduct a review of the neonatal unit. This external doctor reviewed the cases that had occurred but did not find a definitive cause for the spike in deaths and codes. However, that review flagged ongoing concerns about Lucy Letby to management. This doctor's report was forwarded to nursing director Allison Kelly and medical director Ian Harvey, stating that while no single explanation had emerged, the pattern of incidents and the fact that some staff had also raised concerns about a nurse needed immediate attention. At this point, hospital leadership was aware that consultants suspected Letby, but they still required more proof. Why? I just don't have words, you guys. On February 17, 2016, child K, a baby girl that was born extremely premature at only 25 weeks gestation, came to the unit. She was tiny and required intubation or a breathing tube to help her breathe. Shortly after baby K's birth, though, she was placed in the unit, and a doctor testified that he walked in to find baby K's oxygen saturation plummeting and saw Lucy Letby standing by the infant's incubator, not assisting as the baby desaturated. Shockingly, the doctor noticed that baby K's ET tube or endotracheal tube had been dislodged. It was out of position, which would have cut off her air supply. The doctor reported that this occurred in a way that did not seem accidental whatsoever. As nurses, if we hear a desaturation alarm, we run and we go to see, is their airway okay? Do they need help? What's going on? And if it is out, we will call for help immediately. The fact that she didn't do this was very telling. He quickly repositioned the tube and revived baby K, who thankfully stabilized, but over the next few hours, baby K experienced 2 more sudden desaturations with her tube slipping multiple times, even after being secured. After the 3rd time, baby K was transferred out to a more specialized hospital. Sadly, she died 3 days later on February 20th, 2016, due to extreme prematurity and lung issues. Because her outcome could be explained by her critical condition, Letby was not charged with the murder of baby K, but instead with attempted murder for deliberately dislodging the tube in an effort to kill her. On April 9th, 2016, twin boys, child L and M, were in the unit, and Lucy Letby was involved in both of their care. That day, an alarming sequence of events occurred. Baby L suddenly became hypoglycemic or had low blood sugar, and at the same time, his twin brother, baby M, needed full CPR. Baby M stopped breathing and his heart rate dropped, but medical staff managed to revive him after about 30 minutes of CPR. Both twins survived that day despite Lucy's best efforts to kill them. Blood tests later revealed that, just like baby F months prior, baby L had been injected with insulin, causing his blood sugar to crash to dangerous levels. On top of that, the prosecution argued that baby M's code was caused by an air embolism. Letby injected air into his bloodstream through an IV this time. By this point in 2016, management had quietly decided that Lucy Letby should not be scheduled for night shifts due to ongoing concerns. However, Letby volunteered to work an extra shift over the night of April 8th to the 9th, specifically to be present to care for these twins. The insulin evidence in baby L and the earlier from baby F was considered as close to hard proof of foul play as you could get, since there is no explanation for insulin in babies who are not diabetic. The final series of incidents in 2016 began with child N, a baby boy born in early June. Baby N had a genetic condition known as hemophilia, which affects blood clotting. Despite his condition, he was doing really well. On June 3rd, 2016, while Letby was on shift, baby N had a sudden code. According to the prosecution, Letby tried to murder baby N by a particularly traumatic method. She allegedly thrust an NG tube, or a feeding tube, down his throat with force, causing an internal injury and profuse bleeding because of his blood clotting disorder. Nurses and doctors who were alarmed to find baby N bleeding from his mouth and struggling to breathe were shocked. He was resuscitated and survived the attempt by this psychotic serial killer despite her best efforts. Because of his hemophilia, the bleeding could have been seen as a spontaneous issue, but doctors noted it was an unusually severe bleed for a relatively stable baby. Letby was later charged with attempting to murder baby N on 2 occasions, June 3rd and a later date in mid-June, by harming his throat and also injecting air. The breaking point in the saga came late in June of 2016. Child O, P, and Q were a set of triplet boys all born in June. In a devastating 48-hour span, 2 of the triplets, O and P, died on consecutive days, and the third baby, baby Q, had a near-fatal incident while Lucy was the attending nurse. On June 23rd, baby O suddenly crashed and passed away. The next day, baby P, his brother, also coded, and despite the entire team's efforts, he died. Staff were horrified at losing 2 triplet brothers back to back. I cannot imagine how that family felt. My heart breaks for all of them. Autopsies later showed that baby O had suffered unusual liver damage and air in his system, suggestive of trauma and an air embolus, while baby P had air injected via his NG tube, leading to his code. After baby P's death on June 24th, the consultants were in an uproar. Why were they all ignoring all of these losses of lives? Why did it take them so long to be this upset? Dr. Stephen Breary immediately called the duty executive on call. This was Karen Rees, a senior nursing manager, and he demanded that Lucy Letby be removed from duty immediately. Dr. Breary and his colleagues said that they did not want Letby to come in for her next shift, which was scheduled the following day, June 25th. However, according to testimony, Karen Rees flatly refused this request, insisting that there was no evidence to remove Letby and that she would be there scheduled as normal. This doctor cared and knew what was happening, and every avenue he turned down for help blocked him off. The hospital failed these families just as much as this nurse serial killer did, in my opinion. On the very next day's shift, which Letby worked despite the consultant's objections, child Q, the third triplet, suddenly coded 90 minutes after Letby got there and took over duty. Baby Q stopped breathing, and his oxygen and heart rate dropped, an all too familiar scene by now. Thankfully, baby Q survived after emergency treatment. He was the only one of the triplets to make it out alive. The hospital immediately removed baby Q from the neonatal unit and transferred him elsewhere for his safety. Is anyone else starting to notice a pattern here that the hospital's really quick to transfer several babies out of Lucy's care and then they spontaneously get better? This seems very suspicious to me. At this point, medical staff's fears could no longer be brushed aside. The situation had reached an excruciating point. 3 babies attacked in 2 days, 2 of them dead, under one nurse's watch. On June 29th, a group of doctors organized an urgent meeting and presented the case that the series of inexplicable events pointed directly at Lucy Letby as the common denominator. They urged the hospital's executives to take immediate action and remove Letby from the neonatal unit as a precaution because the signs could no longer be ignored. This time, the message finally got through. On June 30th, Lucy Letby worked her final shift in the neonatal unit. After that day, she was taken off active duty in the neonatal ward. The hospital's immediate solution was to move her to a desk job in, ironically, the patient safety and risk department pending further investigation. Additionally, as a stopgap safety measure, the hospital reduced the capacity of the neonatal unit in early July of 2016. They cut the number of intensive care beds and decided not to accept the most premature babies for the time being, just in case it was something else happening. After these moves were made, the spike in unexpected deaths immediately stopped. During that summer of 2016, tensions mounted behind the scenes. Lucy Letby was aware that she was under suspicion by doctors at work. In September of 2016, she filed a formal grievance against the hospital, claiming that she was being, quote, unfairly removed from her duties. A narcissist gaslighting the hospital and refusing to take accountability? Shocker. Around that time, though, she was alerted by the Royal College of Nursing Union that there were allegations being made about her involvement in the baby's deaths. This internal employment dispute put hospital management in a really difficult position, and in January of 2017, the hospital's board upheld her grievance. The board's finding was that the consultants had acted without, quote, hard evidence in isolating her, and that Lucy Letby should be, quote, protected from such allegations until a solid case was established. In fact, the hospital's CEO at the time, Tony Chambers, met with Letby and her parents in December of 2016 to formally apologize for the stress that this caused to her and to reassure them that the matter would soon be resolved. Senior hospital officials even directed the complaining doctors to write a letter of apology to Letby, which they begrudgingly did in February of 2017. I couldn't imagine how this must have felt for them to do after everything that happened. Amid these internal battles, though, the formal medical reviews of the incidents continued on. The Royal College of Pediatrics and Child Health, or the RCPCH, had been commissioned in mid-2016 to review the unit. In November of 2016, the RCPCH's external review report came back. It stated that they found not one single factor linking the deaths. In other words, they did not identify a staff member as a cause. However, the review did emphasize issues like staffing shortfalls and insufficient experienced coverage for the neonatal intensive care services. Basically, it gave hospital executives a narrative that perhaps systemic problems like understaffing might explain a higher death rate, although it did not rule out foul play either. The hospital's medical director, Ian Harvey, reached out to a respected neonatologist, Dr. Jane Hawden of Great Ormond Street Hospital, I hope I said that right, to conduct this deeper analysis. Dr. Hawden, due to her schedule, could only do a limited review though. She looked at records of the 17 cases, so the cluster of suspicious deaths and codes, and produced a short but impactful report. Her findings, delivered in early 2017, concluded that 13 of the incidents could be potentially explained or might have been prevented by improvements in care, but the remaining 4 cases were deeply concerning and merited a, quote, local forensic review of the circumstances and personnel involved, end quote. In other words, a few of the baby's deaths defied any innocent explanation and needed to be investigated closely, including scrutiny of who was on duty, meaning look into Lucy. From July onward, with Letby off the front lines, no more unusual deaths occurred in the neonatal unit. Still, for many staff, the question of what or who had caused the earlier horrors remained unsolved. By early 2017, frustration among the consulting doctors hit a breaking point. They saw that hospital administration was reluctant to involve the police, despite the doctors asking them to. In March of 2017, Dr. Breary, Dr. Jairam, and 2 other consultants went to management yet again, explicitly asking them to involve the police because these incidents needed to be reported. They had even sought advice from the regional neonatal network lead, who also supported involving the authorities. When this request didn't result in immediate action, the doctors took matters a step further. On April 27, 2017, Dr. Breary and Dr. Jairam met directly with detectives from the Cheshire local police to vocalize their concerns about the string of baby deaths and their suspicions of Lucy Letby. They told police that infant codes and deaths of this nature are almost always explainable by natural causes or some type of condition. The fact that so many were unexplained was essentially unheard of and needed immediate attention and investigation. The gravity of the situation was finally acknowledged. In May of 2017, nearly a year after Letby had been removed from the unit, the Cheshire Police officially launched an investigation into the neonatal unit deaths. The investigation was codenamed Operation Hummingbird and was announced publicly by the hospital on May 18, 2017. The hospital's statement carefully framed the police involvement as a, quote, precautionary measure to seek assurances and to rule out unnatural causes of the babies, end quote. For the consultants who had pushed so hard, this was a significant step. At last, the authorities were going to figure out exactly what happened. Nobody could have anticipated that Operation Hummingbird would turn into a massive multi-year investigation. Initially, police said that they would focus on the deaths of the 8 babies that were considered most suspicious, while also review the 7 other deaths and 6 non-fatal codes that happened between June of 2015 to 2016. However, the scope widened dramatically. Investigators began examining records going back to March of 2015, earlier than the first known incident, and forward to July of 2016 to ensure that no babies were missed. They sifted through medical files of over 30 infants and eventually over 12 months of meticulous work started to narrow down a suspect. Want to know who it is? July 3rd of 2018, 2 years after the last unexplained death, Officers showed up at Lucy Letby's home in Chester for a surprise arrest. Lucy Letby was arrested on suspicion of multiple counts of murder and attempted murder. This news sent shockwaves through the community and hospital staff. Although several had suspected it, I think that nobody wanted to truly believe a nurse was capable of something like this. I don't want to believe that a nurse is capable of doing something like this. But that same day, police searched her house on Westbourne Road in Chester, her parents' home in Hereford, and her office at the hospital. In Letby's home, investigators uncovered what would become crucial pieces of evidence. Tucked away in boxes and files, they found confidential hospital documents that Lucy Letby had kept. These documents included report sheets, medical notes, and resuscitation records related to many of the incidents that we just talked about. Just so you know, typically us nurses shred report sheets at the end of our shifts to maintain patient confidentiality, so her keeping these as trophies are very abnormal behavior. They also found some personal items that at first seemed innocent but later took on a really dark meaning. Among some of the notes that were found, scribbled on scrap pieces of paper, were phrases like, quote, "I can't do this anymore. I killed them on purpose because I'm not good enough." Quote, "I'm evil. I did this," end quote. These would later be described as Letby's personal journal entries that were supposed to remain private. Letby was questioned by the police but released on bail after the first arrest because the investigation was still building at that time. Thankfully, though, the story doesn't end there. Over the next year, detectives continued to build the strong case against Lucy Letby. Operation Hummingbird looked at all of Letby's time at the Countess of Chester and even her training prior to employment in nursing school. By 2019, police stated that they were looking closely into 17 infant deaths and 15 non-fatal codes between 2015 to 2016, all connecting to Lucy. Letby was arrested for the second time in connection with additional incidents uncovered by the investigators. She was again questioned about new allegations, and the exact details weren't made public, but they were likely related to babies K and N and others that had come to light. But then again, she bailed pending final charges. Finally, on November 10, 2020, police felt that they finally had enough evidence to charge her formally, and this time she would not get out. This time, prosecutors charged her with 8 counts of murder and 10 counts of attempted murder, relating to a total of 17 different babies. Disgustingly, some babies were victims of more than one alleged attempt that we touched on earlier. Shortly after, additional charges were added, bringing the indictment to 7 counts of murder and 15 counts of attempted murder. Letby appeared in court on November 12, 2020, for the first time, where she denied all charges. She was remanded in custody after that, and due to the sheer gravity of the accusations and the risk of flight or harm, this meant bail was no longer an option, and thank God for that. Lucy Letby was officially accused and charged with murdering babies A, C, D, E, I, O, and P, and attempting to murder babies B, F, G on multiple occasions, H multiple occasions, J, K, L, M, and Q. While awaiting trial, Letby was held in custody, at one point in a high-security facility called HM Prison Bronzefield, and in 2022, she pled not guilty to every charge. This trial would become one of the longest and most complex murder trials in recent British history. But what happened that got us here? At what point did she take off her stethoscope and morph into a vile serial killer? Lucy was born on January 4th, 1990, in the city of Hereford, England. She was an only child of middle-class parents. Her father was a finance manager and her mother worked as an accountant clerk, and she grew up in what seemed like a normal, loving environment. Friends later said that Lucy always knew she wanted to become a nurse. And guys, this makes me sick to my stomach. Did these evil intentions form as a child, or did those come later? Her mother told her how difficult her labor was in having Lucy, and she apparently was inspired by her birth story and felt gratitude to the neonatal nurses that helped save her life. I can't help but wonder if her sinister intentions started at this point or later on. Many debate that whole nature versus nurture theory, and hearing that Lucy knew she wanted to be a neonatal nurse from a young age just makes me wonder what side of that theory she falls on. But Let me know if you guys agree in the comments, or let me know if you think it's nature or nurture. Letby studied nursing at the University of Chester, specializing in pediatric nursing, and graduated with a Bachelor's of Science in Nursing in 2011. During her orientation, she completed clinicals in neonatal units, including at Liverpool Women's Hospital and the Countess of Chester Hospital, where she worked. Not everything went smoothly in her training, though. Letby initially failed one of her final nursing exams, with a supervisor stating that she lacked clinical knowledge and needed improvement in reading parents' nonverbal cues. She appealed for a second chance with a different assessor and passed, becoming the first member of her family to graduate from university. This is surprising for me to learn because in the US, if you fail in nursing school, you would have to completely start over. It's cutthroat for a reason, because when you're responsible for someone's life, there truly is zero room for error. Do you think that if the school was more strict about this, that she wouldn't have gone to do what she did? Let me know your guys' thoughts. In January 2012, at age 22, Lucy Letby began her professional career as a registered nurse in the neonatal unit at the Countess of Chester Hospital. By all accounts, she was a competent and dedicated nurse. Early in her career, she even participated in a fundraising campaign to build a new neonatal unit for the hospital, appearing on the local news as a proud advocate for improving care. In a 2013 staff profile, Letby described her duties as, quote, caring for a wide range of babies requiring various levels of support, and said that she loved seeing the infants progress and supporting their families. It all sounds like she had the right intentions and was saying all of the right things, so when did this change? Colleagues never could have imagined that their compassionate coworker later would be named the Angel of Death. There were a few minor incidents in Letby's nursing career, though, that in hindsight may or may not have foreshadowed some potential concerns about her character. In July, Letby and a senior nurse made a serious medication error by setting a newborn's morphine drip to 10 times the correct dose, and this was an incident that could have been fatal. The baby fortunately survived, but the mistake led the manager to suspend Letby from administering medication and require additional training. I think any nurse could tell you that we've all made mistakes, but very few can say that they've made that level of a mistake before. With narcotics, especially with children, we typically have a buddy system to double-check math and rates and to ensure safe administration. But even with the buddy system, though, mistakes can happen. It does seem to me, though, that the leadership at the hospital handled this situation appropriately. Lucy was reportedly upset for being disciplined, though. She complained that the response was an, quote, overreaction, and after a week, after she raised concerns to the unit manager, her suspension from giving drugs was lifted. In March 2014, she completed a specialized training in neonatal intensive care, qualifying her to care for the most critical babies. By early 2015, she had also spent time at the larger Liverpool Women's Hospital on a training assignment to broaden her experience in these ICU babies. By the beginning of 2015, though, Lucy Letby was a fully qualified NICU nurse, trusted with the hospital's most sick and fragile babies. Lucy Letby's trial began in the fall of 2022, capturing the attention of not only the UK media and public, but the whole world. A registered nurse that worked in the NICU turned into a serial killer? It was absolutely horrifying and captivated everyone. The trial was held at Manchester Crown Court due to the high-profile nature of the case and the need for a large secured venue. Presiding over the trial was Justice James Gross, a senior judge, and a jury of 8 women and 4 men. On October 10th, the prosecution opened the case against Lucy Letby. She faced 22 counts on the indictment, 7 of murder, 15 of attempted murder, and this totaled 17 babies. Lucy, sitting in the dock, pled not guilty to everything. From the beginning, measures were taken to protect the identities of everyone involved. The 17 victims were referred to in court only as baby letter names that we've already talked about. This anonymity order had been put into place to shield the families, since the infants' identities and family details were highly sensitive and they were going through the worst imaginable tragedy. 9 of Letby's former colleagues who testified were granted anonymity, and they were identified by numbers because of the circumstances as well. Anonymity for adult witnesses is very rare and emphasized the fear and impact surrounding the case for everyone that was involved. The press was strictly prohibited from naming the babies or staff, and this restriction is rarely seen in proceedings unless it involves a matter of national security. The judge had ruled that ensuring honest testimony from hospital staff was far more important than making their names public. Lead prosecutor Nick Johnson Casey methodically laid out the Crown's case. Over the course of many months, the prosecution called dozens of witnesses, doctors, nurses, experts, and parents, and presented an overwhelming amount of evidence. The central argument was chilling. Wherever Lucy Letby was on shift, healthy or stabilizing babies mysteriously coded and some died. When she was absent, those events stopped. Johnson told the jury, quote, "By a process of elimination, she was the constant presence when these babies collapsed and died," end quote. He claimed that the likelihood of so many tragedies happening to one nurse purely by coincidence was essentially impossible. The jury was shown a staff chart highlighting Lucy Letby's shifts coinciding with each incident. 25 incidents matched to her duty times and patient assignments. Prosecution then delved into how Lucy committed the attacks, supporting each allegation with evidence. They demonstrated that an air embolus, or air injected into the bloodstream, was a recurring method, which we already know about by this point. Doctors testified to finding unexplained air in baby circulation or abnormal x-rays showing excessive gas in the stomach. The skin modeling observed in some babies was consistent also with air emboli. For example, baby D's and baby O's cases involved clear signs of air in the vessels and organs. A medical expert explained how injecting even a small amount of air into a baby's IV line could be rapidly fatal and is difficult to detect postmortem, and Lucy had the skill set to know this. Overfeeding with milk was demonstrated in baby G's case. Evidence showed that baby G's feed measurement and the projectile vomiting incident that we talked about already indicated that she was given far more milk than ordered, and this caused this event. Insulin poisoning was proven through lab results for baby F and baby L, which we talked about this before, but blood tests were performed at an outside lab that showed extremely high insulin levels and low blood sugar, which could only mean exogenous insulin was given. Exogenous means that this was insulin that the babies did not produce themselves, so it was clearly given to them. Additionally, both babies had corresponding twin siblings attacked as well, reinforcing the idea that it was not a natural occurrence by any stretch of the imagination. The prosecution's medical expert, Dr. Evans, called the insulin findings the, quote, "smoking gun evidence," end quote, of deliberate harm. The eyewitness accounts from colleagues were extremely powerful in the courtroom. One lead doctor recalled the February 2016 scene with baby K, describing how he walked in to find Letby standing by an alarmingly desaturating baby with doing nothing. He explicitly remembered that because it was so strange, because normally a nurse would be shouting for help or actively trying to assist the moment a baby's oxygen dropped, but Letby stood by and did nothing. She watched her eerily. Another doctor testified that about an hour before baby P died, Lucy made an ominous remark. Seeing the baby struggling, Letby said to the doctor, quote, "He's not leaving here alive, is he?" end quote. The startled doctor responded, "Don't say that," and rushed to aid the baby. Sadly, baby P did indeed die that day. Nurses also described Letby's odd behavior during and after incidents. For example, she had to be told more than once not to enter the family room where grieving parents were with their deceased baby because she had no reason to be in there. The prosecution claimed that Lucy had a, quote, "intrusive curiosity about the grieving process," and to me, it's similar to killers revisiting the crime scene and reminiscing on it. Lucy Letby wanted to watch the parents continue to suffer and see the lifeless baby that she murdered. The parent witnesses added heartbreaking details. The mother of baby E, the infant who died bleeding from the mouth, testified about hearing that scream and encountering Letby by his cradle, and how Letby tried to reassure her that everything was fine by telling her, "Trust me, I'm a nurse." The parents of some surviving babies reported how their infants suddenly deteriorated for no known reason. Investigators found damning physical evidence during the searches of Letby's home. They had recovered handwritten notes which became a focal point of the trial. In one note, Letby had written phrases like, "I am evil, I did this, and I don't deserve to live. I killed them on purpose because I'm not good enough," end quote. In another, she expressed confusion and denial, saying, quote, "I haven't done anything wrong, and why me?" They were scribbled alongside, quote, "not good enough." One line read, quote, "I don't know if I killed them. Maybe I did. Maybe this is all down to me," end quote. These notes appeared almost as stream of consciousness-like, mixing guilt with self-pity, but the prosecution argued that these were essentially confessions, or at least acknowledgments of some responsibility. They called it the closest thing to a confession that we have. Handwriting experts actually verified that these notes were written by Lucy Letby, so blaming it on anyone else wasn't going to happen. Additionally, Letby's personal diary was seized, and prosecutors pointed out that on certain dates, she had put a mark or initials on days when babies died or were attacked. The prosecution suggested that it was some kind of form of a trophy, and I would agree with that. Another piece of evidence was the stack of confidential medical documents found in Letby's possession. Police discovered that she had kept 257 report sheets and other paperwork from the unit, 21 of which were related to babies involved in these charges. Taking these documents home with this protected information violates hospital policy, and there's no legitimate reason to do so. Letby claimed that it was accidental and that she, quote, "collected paper," end quote, and simply forgot to discard these after shift. However, the fact that so many were related to the affected babies raised suspicion that she kept them as souvenirs as well. Investigators even found that Letby had a paper shredder at her house, undermining her excuse that she didn't know how to dispose of these documents because she forgot to return them. She could have done the right thing and shredded them, but she simply decided not to because I agree with them. I think it's a trophy. The prosecution also pointed out Letby's texts and internet activity as further evidence of guilt. Just hours after one baby, baby M, nearly died, Letby was texting a friend about winning 135 pounds on the Grand National Horse Race and planning, quote, "an unpacking party with flavored vodka," with no mention of the traumatic event that had just occurred at work. In another instance, following baby A's death and baby B's code, Letby texted a coworker that she needed to get back into caring for critical babies, quote, "for confidence." What is with her and this confidence issue? When her supervisor tried keeping her out of the intensive care room for a bit, Letby became irritated, texting that she had, quote, "a heated exchange about it." Right after that exchange, baby C crashed in the other room. These messages painted a picture of someone who was too eager to be involved with the sickest babies, even after traumatic incidents, which prosecutors argued was because she was causing those emergencies. It was also revealed that Letby made repeated Facebook searches for the parents of babies who had died. On several occasions, often late at night or on significant anniversaries like the baby's birthday or date of death, Letby looked up the families on social media to relish in their grief. She is sick. In total, she searched for 11 different families of victims, some searches occurring just minutes apart. Letby tried to explain this just as plain curiosity, saying she would often just browse people on Facebook out of boredom, but doing so specifically for the bereaved parents repeatedly struck the prosecution as deeply morbid and incriminating. All these strands of evidence, medical, forensic, documentary, digital, and eyewitnesses, were woven together to support the prosecution's narrative of a cold, calculated murderer hiding in plain sight dressed up as a nurse. Nick Johnson, KC, stated that Letby's motive, while ultimately known, quote, "only to her," might have been a perverse desire for attention or drama or a pathological satisfaction in taking control over life and death. No clear motive was ever definitively proven, but Letby had no history of mental illness, no grudges, and nothing to gain from the baby's deaths. The prosecution essentially argued that no sane motive is needed for someone to commit such evil. Sometimes the actions just speak for themselves. The judge would later say, quote, "Only Lucy Letby knows what drove her to do this," end quote. Against this formidable prosecution case, Lucy Letby's defense team, led by barrister Ben Myers KC, faced an uphill battle. Their strategy was to cast doubt on the evidence, suggest alternative explanations for the baby's outcomes, and portray Letby as a dedicated, caring nurse who was being scapegoated for systemic failures. The defense's bold claim was that there had been no crime at all. They argued that the babies in question did die or code under Lucy Letby's watch, but these were happening due to natural or medical reasons, and the hospital mismanagement and lack of resources were the true culprits in any of these preventable deaths. In his opening, her attorney said, "Letby is a dedicated nurse in a system that failed her and the babies," telling the jury that the prosecution was wrongly assuming deliberate harm when in fact a combination of negligence, overcrowding, and sheer bad luck was to blame. He pointed out known issues. The neonatal unit was often short-staffed, under pressure, and dealing with an increase in very premature babies well beyond its capacity. According to the defense, the massive failure of care in a busy hospital neonatal unit, far too great to blame on any one person, had tragically resulted in these babies' deaths. In other words, if the jury perceived that something was wrong at the hospital, Myers urged them to see it as an institutional problem, not the work of a, quote, angel of mercy serial killer. To rebut the medical evidence, the defense noted that many of the babies were extremely fragile and that unexpected codes do happen in neonatal medicine. They brought up the point that even the experts admitted some infant deaths can remain unexplained. For example, regarding the infants who had bled profusely, like baby E and baby N, the defense threw out the idea that maybe a medical procedure or condition, maybe a stomach ulcer or another clotting issue, could have caused it, rather than an attack from Lucy. Myers suggested that the extraordinary bleeding seen in baby E might have been due to a medical intervention, perhaps a tube or surgical instrument, rather than anything Letby did. Concerning the air embolism cases, though, the defense attacked the credibility of that diagnosis. They pointed out that no one had actually seen Letby inject air and that diagnosing an air embolism after the fact can be subjective. They noted that none of the prosecution's expert witnesses had firsthand experience with criminal air embolism cases in infants, since it's very rare. They also argued that scientific literature on air emboli was not concrete. The requirements to infer an air embolus were not clearly met, according to them. In fact, they made a legal submission of, quote, "no case to answer" on some of the air embolus counts, essentially asking the judge to throw those cases out for a lack of solid evidence. Justice Goss, however, denied that request, ruling that there was sufficient evidence that injecting air could indeed cause the observed codes. Myers also announced that the defense did not need to prove an alternative cause. They only needed to show reasonable doubt about the prosecution's claims. He emphasized that Lucy Letby had no criminal record, no disciplinary record of harming anyone in her years of nursing, and was considered a competent professional nurse by many. The notion that she simply decided to start killing babies defied logic. The defense argued, especially without a clear motive. The centerpiece of the defense was Lucy Letby's own testimony. In May of 2023, taking a significant risk, Letby took the stand in her own defense. This is a relatively uncommon practice in high-profile cases because it opens the defendant to a potentially brutal cross-examination. Letby's time on the stand lasted for around 2 weeks. Under questioning by her own attorney, she presented herself as this devastated and bewildered nurse and just heartbroken by the accusations. She broke down in tears at points, insisting, quote, "I only ever wanted to care for the babies and I did my best," end quote. She described how the allegations had crushed her spirit and her mental health, saying, quote, "I don't think you can be accused of anything worse than this," end quote. She claimed that her life had been destroyed by these horrendous claims. She described that the stress of being removed from her beloved job and how she felt victimized by hospital gossip and suspicion destroyed her. The defense portrayed her as a young woman of exemplary character caught in a nightmare that she did not cause. Unbelievably, Letby denied harming any babies. When confronted with each case, she often said something to the effect of, quote, "I was there, but I did nothing to hurt child blank. I cared for them." For the insulin poisonings, she claimed to have no idea how insulin got into the babies and suggested it might have been an accidental contamination or testing error. Consecutive testing errors? For the air embolus cases, she said that she never injected air and that these babies were just very sick or coded for reasons she could not explain. She also offered innocent explanations for incriminating behavior. Regarding the handwritten notes, which read as confessions, Letby and her defense had an explanation. These were her diary-like outpourings written in a state of despair after she was taken off duty and feeling accused. She claimed phrases like, "I did this," did not mean I murdered them, but rather reflected that she felt somehow responsible or guilty by association for the baby's deaths, or even that she was in such a dark place that she had begun to question herself. It was revealed that a general practitioner, her doctor, had suggested that she write down her feelings as a coping mechanism while under the investigation. The defense leaned on that to argue that those notes were not a gotcha, but a window into a distraught mind. Distraught or psychopathic? Under cross-examination by the prosecution, Letby faced a grilling. Reports from the courtroom noted that as prosecutors confronted her with the inconsistencies and hard evidence, her demeanor shifted. She became flustered, sometimes muddling up her own story, and occasionally snapped back, a stark contrast to the calm, composed, professional image that she had worked so hard to portray earlier. For example, when asked why so many incidents clustered around her, she could only say it was a coincidence and that the unit was unlucky, which likely rang hollow after hearing weeks of evidence by this point. Prosecutor Nick Johnson pressed her on points like the Facebook searches. Why check the grieving parents' profiles? And on those dates? She responded it was, quote, normal curiosity and that she was always on her phone. That did not come across well to anyone. He also questioned why she texted colleagues such seemingly nonchalant messages during the tragedies. She had no clear answer beyond saying that she coped by trying to act normal. One of the most dramatic moments was when Johnson showed her the, quote, "I am evil, I did this" note and simply asked her to explain it. She insisted it was not a confession. The prosecution suggested it was exactly that, a guilty conscience erupting on paper. Observers noted that Lucy Letby had no reasonable explanation for phrases like, "I killed them on purpose," except to repeat that she didn't remember writing it, but must have been in a very low state. How convenient. The defense had to contend with the sheer volume of evidence, though. In closing arguments in July of 2023, Myers asked the jury to remember Lucy's presumption of innocence and not to be overwhelmed by emotion or horror at the baby's outcomes. He said that the prosecution's case was, quote, "a combination of coincidences and conjecture wrongly painted as certainty." After hearing 7 months of testimony, the jurors had a lot to consider. After a trial that lasted 10 months, from October 22 through July, the jury began deliberations. It was a complex case with 22 counts to decide on, and their discussions were lengthy. They deliberated over 110 hours over the course of weeks, but finally, on August 18, 2023, the jury had reached a verdict. The outcome was decisive on most counts. Lucy Letby was found guilty on 14 of the 22 charges. Specifically, she was convicted of the murder of 7 babies, A, C, D, E, I, O, and P, and convicted of the attempted murder of 7 other infants, babies B, F, G, L, M, and N. These guilty verdicts officially established Lucy Letby as a serial killer, and in fact, Britain's most prolific modern serial killer. The jury acquitted her on 2 charges of attempted murder related to one of the alleged attacks on baby G and one of the attacks on baby H. On the remaining 6 charges of attempted murder, the jury could not reach a verdict. The undecided counts corresponded to the second alleged attempt on baby H in September of 2015, the alleged attempt on baby J, the initial attempt on baby K, 2 alleged attempts on baby N in June of 2016, and the attempt on baby Q. These hung counts indicated that at least some jurors still harbored doubt, but not enough to convict nor acquit, so no verdict was returned on those at that time. Upon delivering the verdict, the court learned that Letby had refused to appear in the dock for that final portion of the trial. In fact, during the later phases of the deliberations, it became clear many verdicts were going against her, so Letby chose to remain in the cell and not face the courtroom because she is a coward. The formal sentencing hearing took place on August 21st, 2023. By law, each murder count carries a mandatory life sentence, and the particularly egregious nature of these crimes meant the judge could impose a, quote, whole life order, meaning life in prison with no possibility of release, which is the harshest punishment under UK law. Letby, now a convicted murderer at the age of 33, again refused to attend her sentencing. This decision prevented the families from seeing her as they delivered their impact statements, which to me is not fair or okay whatsoever. I thought that she loved seeing people grieve. The UK Prime Minister at the time, Rishi Sunak, even called her absence cowardly and vowed to enact laws to force criminals to face their sentencing. In a nearly empty dock, Justice James Goss proceeded to sentence her in her absence. He addressed the court and effectively spoke to Letby, wherever she was listening, with powerful remarks. He labeled Letby's actions a cruel, calculated, and cynical campaign of child murder. He noted that she targeted the smallest and most vulnerable of patients, betraying the trust that her profession and the baby's family had placed in her. There was a deep malevolence bordering on sadism in your actions, Justice Goss said, emphasizing the apparent delight or at least lack of empathy in how she carried out these crimes. He pointed out her lack of remorse because throughout the trial, Letby never admitted any wrongdoing or showed genuine remorse for the outcomes. The judge stated, quote, "You have no remorse. There are no mitigating factors," end quote. Given all of this, the judge had only one appropriate sentence: life imprisonment with a whole life order. Letby became the fourth woman in UK history to receive a whole life order term. This means that she will never be eligible for parole. She will die in prison. There is no punishment out there that can equate to this level of harm and suffering that she has caused. The courtroom during sentencing was filled with emotion. Families of the victims gave impact statements that brought many, including seasoned court reporters, to tears. Parents described shattered lives, enduring trauma, and the cruel loss of their infants. A father of twins, one murdered and one survivor, told Letby that he hoped that she lives a very long life in prison and spends every single day suffering for what you've done. The father of the triplet boys, two of whom were killed by Letby, spoke of how losing his sons destroyed him, left him depressed, and eroded his trust in the medical system. He said, quote, "Lucy Letby has destroyed our lives," end quote, and voiced an anger and hatred toward her that would never go away. Another mother said that while God saved her baby, a survivor left disabled, the devil found her in the form of Letby. These statements emphasize the unspeakable pain Lucy Letby had inflicted on these families. Because Letby wasn't present, the judge ordered that she be provided copies of all the family's statements and his remarks so that she would have to confront what was said. Outside the court, the public reaction was one of shock, grief, and outrage. Letby's name became synonymous with betrayal and evil. Newspapers ran headlines calling her a monster and discussing how, quote, "a beige or ordinary person had hidden an immense amount of darkness," end quote. Memorials for the babies, some of whom had died years earlier, were brought up again in local communities. There was a widespread sympathy for the families and collective sense of mourning for the innocent lives that were lost. With Lucy Letby now sentenced to spend her life behind bars, attention turned to understanding how these crimes went undetected for so long and ensuring accountability and lessons would be learned. The case prompted strong reactions from the medical community, myself included, the public, and the government. Within days of Letby's conviction, the UK government announced an independent inquiry into the case. By August 30th, 2023, the inquiry began, and its job to investigate the circumstances at the Countess of Chester Hospital, how complaints were handled, whether opportunities to stop Letby were missed. These investigations also looked at the wider regulatory issues, such as how hospitals respond to clusters of patient deaths and how concerns about staff are escalated. As of September 2024, the inquiry began holding hearings. Key figures, doctors, nurses, administrators, and the NHS officials were reviewing and providing evidence. One concerning detail from early inquiry hearings is that an executive had misled the hospital board about the external reviews in 2016, suggesting that nothing was found when, in fact, serious concerns were being flagged. The inquiry is ongoing, and its final report is expected to make national recommendations soon. There was also the matter of Lucy Letby's nursing registration. The Nursing and Midwifery Council, or NMC, which licenses nurses in the UK, moved to strike her off the record and revoke her nursing license. In fact, by the time of sentencing, Letby was no longer allowed to practice. She had been effectively dismissed and would formally be removed from the nursing register. This was a formality, given her prison sentence, but it was symbolic and important. The outrage over Letby's refusal to appear in court for sentencing had immediate political repercussions. The Justice Secretary vowed to change that law so that convicts can be forced to attend their sentencing hearings. Draft legislation, nicknamed Martin's Law and also informally called the Lucy Letby Law, was being prepared in late 2023 to give judges the power to impose additional penalties on those who abstain from hearing their fate, or even to physically require attendance. By early 2024, the government announced that it would introduce measures to address this, recognizing the anguish it caused victims' families when perpetrators refused to face them. Even after the trial, the Cheshire Police did not close the book. They announced that they were conducting a thorough review of all neonatal admissions during Letby's employment to see if any other suspicious incidents may have been linked to her that were previously not flagged. This involved going through 4,000 neonatal unit admissions across the two hospitals that she worked in, the Countess of Chester and her Liverpool training period. This massive investigation is still ongoing. On the legal front, Letby initially had 28 days to appeal her conviction after the August 2023 verdict. In the fall, there were reports that her legal team was exploring grounds to appeal. By May of 2024, Letby did seek permission to appeal at least one of her convictions, but the Court of Appeals rejected that bid. She attempted to challenge the single attempted murder conviction, likely related to one of the later charges, but a judge refused permission, stating that the evidence was sufficient. As of mid-2025, Letby has not successfully appealed her convictions, and given the strength of the case, any appeal would face a very high bar. With there being so many victims and instances, I don't understand why she even attempted to appeal any, but one? Why? Ironically, after Lucy's attempt to appeal one of her charges, in June of 2024, one of the hung counts from the first trial was retried. The Crown Prosecution Service decided to pursue a retrial on the attempted murder of baby K, feeling strongly that they had enough evidence to try again. This was the incident where the doctor caught Letby by the incubator and the baby's tube was displaced. The retrial took place at Manchester Crown Court again. After a 4-week proceeding, the new jury found Lucy Letby guilty of attempting to murder baby K. This brought her total convictions to 7 murders and 8 attempted murders. That same month, Letby was brought back to court, which she again refused to attend in person, appearing via video link briefly, and received an additional life sentence for the baby K attempt, although it had no effect on her sentence ultimately because she's already going to be serving a whole life term. This case was broadcasted globally, with headlines often describing Letby as a killer nurse and struggling with the contrast between her girl next door appearance and heinous acts. The story of Lucy Letby is a horrendous, devastating case. It's the story of trust betrayed in the most horrific way. A nurse entrusted with fragile newborn lives who instead murdered them. This destroyed families by robbing them of the future that they had always envisioned with their little ones by their side. This case is also the story of persistence in pursuit of truth, of doctors who refused to let unexplained deaths remain unexplained, and of police and prosecutors who unraveled a complex web of incidents to reveal the pattern of murder by serial killer Lucy Letby. Currently, Letby remains incarcerated. She will never be freed to see the light of day or another night in the hospital ever again. She has been erased from the nursing profession, and her name now stands alongside Britain's worst criminals. In prison, she is reportedly in isolation for her own protection, as child killers are hated even among other inmates. The families of the victims continue to cope with their immeasurable loss. Some of the baby's parents have had subsequent children, but the trauma of what happened can never fully heal. They have also called for the hospital to remember their babies not as victims of a crime, but as cherished little lives. Many parents mention their children's personalities, no matter how young, and how loved they were from day one. In the end, the case leaves us with haunting questions about human nature. How did a normal young woman turn into a predator of infants? Could anything have stopped her sooner? These questions may never have satisfying answers because there's nothing we can do to bring these babies back. Hospitals are environments of trust. Trust that caregivers will do everything that we can to help patients. When that trust is betrayed, the damage is deep and far-reaching. Monsters like Lucy defame what we work so hard to do, and that's to save lives, not take them. Today's case was extremely difficult for me to dig into because, to me, anyone that takes advantage of those that can't defend themselves in this way is the ultimate form of evil and cowardice. She saw these innocent little fighters that could never defend themselves and decided to use her training to murder them. It makes no sense to me, and it does make sense that she needs to remain in solitary confinement. Lucy Letby is a disgusting excuse of a human being, and I hate that our nursing profession is what gave her the power to access these sweet babies. Evil can hide in plain sight, and even institutions of care are not immune to horrible humans. I truly wish that anyone in healthcare would be required to undergo intense psych evals prior to going into nursing because things like this should never happen. Rest in peace to all of the 7 lives that were heinously stolen, and I pray that the 8 soldiers that are still here are living happy and healthy lives. Today's case came highly recommended, so thank you, Emmeline, and everyone else that suggested it after her. This was a really, really heavy case, guys, so please be sure to reset, do some self-care, and also send me a butterfly if you made it to this point. Please be sure to take extra great care of yourselves this week. Nurses' orders. See you guys next time. Bye.